Hello everyone and welcome back to Navis Nobilite. I am Captain Zelnick and today we're going to talk about why play Battlefleet Gothic. And this is going to be a little bit of a longer video and I'm going to try to not ramble as much about a game that I absolutely adore and why you should invest money into it. So be prepared, get a drink, get a snack, whatever. I started playing Battlefleet Gothic a long time ago, probably sometime between 2007 and 2008, pretty late in its development cycle that I would later find out would be canceled come 2010, 2011. But what I discovered as a 40K player is that Battlefleet Gothic, on the whole, differed dramatically from Warhammer 40K at the time. At the time, Warhammer 40K, much like it is today, is heavily based upon who is the current cool race, who has just had a bunch of new minis released, and whether or not you are a Space Marine player. Because ultimately, if you were a Space Marine player in 40K, you always had a massive advantage, give or take the time frame. There was a long time frame back then where Chaos had a massive advantage over just about everybody. But you know what I mean. Everybody knows the fanboyism. I was never a fan of Space Marines. I played Tau, and I regularly got my little blueberry ass whooped regularly by Space Marine players at the time. So when I got into Battlefleet Gothic, not only did I discover that the system, the mechanics, the complexity, all of it were vastly better designed than anything 40K really had to offer. Battlefleet Gothic functions on a level, at least in my opinion, about a step and a half above that of 40K at the time that it was currently being supported by Games Workshop. Now, today, I would say that it stands like 5 or 6 steps above the current rendition of 40K, a game that I no longer play, simply because Games Workshop has demonstrated that they're a bunch of rampaging hypocrites, and when they say they want to simplify the rules, it only takes about 2 years for those rules to become 5 times more complicated than they were before. Thank you, Games Workshop. Now, obviously, Battlefleet Gothic has not had an official release beyond its video game in, I hate to say this, over a decade. So why play what many people claim to be a dead hobby? Well, number one, there is an advantage to the rules not having been updated on a yearly basis. Namely, you don't have to worry about power creep. People have to learn how to use their different races at every advantage that they have with them in order to win. If the rules stay the same, people can find ways within those rules to win without going and crying to an authority figure to make something else better. Also, the rules are currently in the custodianship of the fans. The fans really are the ones who are in control of how things change and when. And thankfully, they haven't changed since 2010, beyond a couple of minor changes due to either very bad writing or it's very clear that something meant one thing but can be interpreted as another. So that's another important facet. Games Workshop basically has no hand in the current setup for Battlefleet Gothic. Not only that, I would also say that being in the hands of the fans is a massive advantage simply because Games Workshop hasn't demonstrated goodwill towards its fans for ages. And you know for a fact that if they suddenly decided to take interest in Battlefleet Gothic again, whatever they do is likely not going to be very well loved. So, at the very least, you know that it's in decent hands. Another excellent reason to get into Battlefleet Gothic is it's actually, if you know what you're doing, cheaper than any other Games Workshop game out there. Because Games Workshop no longer officially supports it, they really haven't been paying attention to 3D printers or 3D modelers while they go around and make ships more beautiful and more detailed than anything Games Workshop ever accomplished. There's only maybe a couple of examples of ships out there that really have stood up against the test of time from the days when Battlefleet Gothic was still being sold by Games Workshop. I think the new Forge World Tau fleet, and new is under very heavy quotations there at this point, definitely stands up and is still the best looking stuff they've ever made. There's also a couple of other really cool stuff like the Demiurge and the original Imperial cruisers and Chaos cruisers still have survived the test of time, but there are a lot of other things out there, like everything made out of pewter, which has been sitting around for over a decade and hasn't really weathered it very well. So now that we have entered the domain of the resin 3D printer at supremely high quality, I mean, look at the ship on the screen. That's a ship designed by Soulforge Studios, and it's gorgeous. It's more detailed and more interesting than anything Games Workshop ever made. So the community really has stepped up and taken the opportunity to remake all of the ships in the game. Go to Soulforge Studios, go to Battlefleet Galaxy, check out Italian Moose's 3D Cult. Look at all of these gorgeous things and go and get them, and they're cheap. There are a lot of local friendly 3D printer equipped individuals who will happily take significantly less money than Games Workshop would and way cheaper than Shapeways, where you can get an entire fleet for like 150 to 130 bucks depending on the fleet. It's phenomenal. So, cheap game, excellent rules, community that's active, all of these great things. Not only that, there is another really good reason to play. There are multiple ways to play it online. Now, do not bother with the official Battlefleet Gothic or Battlefleet Gothic Armada video games. They're terrible. They're basically bumper cars in space with explosions. You can play on Vassal. Check out my Discord server in the Vassal how-to and how to set up Vassal. You can also play on Tabletop Simulator if that's something you prefer, but ultimately you can play this with your friends on the internet with a high degree of accuracy. Also, another really important thing, the miniatures and are just gorgeous. Every race has a stunning fleet that is so well conceived that there are very few things that are considered to be useless, and those very rare things that have questionable usefulness are still beautiful and fun to paint. The painting is still real in this hobby, and you can go to the area in the Discord for the all of the visual media exists and the showcases to see just the works of unquestioning art that have been made for Battlefleet Gothic. And it's so much fun to put these on the table and blow up your best friend's ships with. So how does Battlefleet Gothic stack up to, say, 40K or Age of Sigmar? Now, back in the day, I would have said that if you were going to compare the complexity of the rules and the intuitiveness of the rules and the immersion of the rules, back in the day when I was playing it in like 2008 or 2009 or 2010, I would say it sat roughly between Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40K, with Warhammer 40K being a simpler system and Warhammer Fantasy being a more complex system. Today, this Battlefleet Gothic as a whole is more nuanced and more complicated and has more crunchy rules than modern fantasy or 40K. It is far more complicated than Age of Sigmar, which is basically just I throw dice at the other person and they die if they get hit in the eyeball, and Warhammer 40K, which is basically a giant crack smoking insanity fest. Now, there are some other really interesting things that are coming up now with the Leagues of Votann being released. We're going to be seeing the Demiurge effectively turned into the Votann because the lore has been effectively merged together. The Demiurge really were the prototypes for the Votann, and I'm really excited to see what they do with the story, so maybe the community can come together again and give them a more official fleet and a better looking fleet, hopefully. But one way or another, the hobby is still alive. The hobby is very dynamic. The hobby is still growing, especially with the very hard work that people like the workers on the Fleet List Remastered have done. There's a lot of work that has been done in the rulebook remastered to make it look better and more approachable to people, though it still needs some work. There's a lot of repetition in it that needs to be weeded out. There is incredible work being done by amazingly talented people to making ships not just official, but fan made ships. So the fan made fleets actually have miniatures that you can play with. There's so much being done, and there's so much good work being done by every aspect of the community. Now, there are also smaller communities within Battlefleet Gothic that function off of homebrew rules. These are all very prototypical rules. They're not very well thought out and they're not very well done. Some of them have really cool concepts within them. Like, for example, Battlefleet Heresy has a lot of good going for it, though unfortunately, at least in this observer's humble opinion, it gives you too much freedom to field whatever you want, and therefore it kind of removes some of the nuance from a lot of the fleets and covers up the weaknesses of fleets. Instead of focusing chapters of Space Marines on specific ship designs. They just let you do what you want, and it's kind of a hash. Unfortunately, it homogenizes the game, and homogenization actually harms games. There's also Battlefleet Gothic XR, which is a reasonably popular uh, homebrew total remake system. Now, the rules of XR are not necessarily that bad. There are some that I actually kind of think we should move over into Battlefleet Gothic generally. But what they do with a lot of the ships is a great deal of wish listing and weakness removal from fleet lists, ultimately making the game not Battlefleet Gothic anymore. A lot of the balance of Battlefleet Gothic is not necessarily what you can take, it's also what you can't take. And XR basically erases that and pretends that you should be allowed to have everything cool under the sun, which destroys the balance of the game, as I said. There's also cool little projects like BFG 2020, which seek to, instead of having dedicated shooting phases for both players, the shooting phase alternates between players. It works really, really well for Imperial and Chaos, but if you add in any other fleet, it just breaks apart because many fleets are designed to be able to do a great deal of focusing fire without return fire in the same round, namely the Eldar, and some fleets have so few ships in them that if you alternate fire, smaller ship number fleets are ultimately going to suffer. So there's a lot of work that has to be done before that really kind of comes into its own. But there's a lot of movement and there's a lot of work being done. And you know what? I want these homebrewers to keep working on their projects and make them the beautiful thing that they really want them to be. And I hope all of you have enjoyed this video. If you want to support the channel, go ahead and donate if you can. Like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and I'll see you all again in the next video. Have a great day.